All right. Yeah, that's, thank you so much for that.
Start.
All right. Okay, very good. All right, so we have recognized over the decades that foresight in organizations is a big deal. In fact, a great volume of work, I would hesitate to say a majority of foresight and futures practice is in organizations and strategy. So there's no getting away from it. That's where a lot of the foresight and future studies practice exists. This session, we've had one non-arrival, so it's only 2 presentations. This session will be looking at futures literacy in organizations, but it will also be looking at, in the first presentation, at leaders' foresight, capabilities, and the relationship with 2 things. The first, its ability to proxy defensible organizational futures, and secondly, to determine a future level of employee engagement. So we're very excited to have these 2 presentations. And as I said, both presentations make content and methodological contributions to the field. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Wade Azmi, who will be presenting the first of the 2 presentations. Thanks.
Thanks, Luke. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wade Azmi. I'm a lifelong learner, 23 years of academia, 20 years of consultancy, and 3 years as an academic. So I'm still at a very early stage of my academic career. And today I would like to bring to your attention a topic that I found in the real world a major issue for any organization, which is employee engagement. We'll talk about the case for engagement and why this is important before we talk about strategic leadership. Then we will address the theoretical foundation that we used to establish this study. We will also address the conceptual framework that we applied in place, the methodological framework that we used. And then finally, we will talk about the future scenarios that we estimate. The study is focused in Singapore. And as you know, Singapore is a small island that lacks human resources. As a matter of fact, they don't have human resources at all. And they don't have any other resources, except, of course, of being a financial hub and having the port and Singapore Airlines. So when you have a country like this, you need to be very careful in terms of how you drive the future. The case for engagement and the data you'll see here is not an exception. It's actually very similar to data we collect anywhere in the world. As a matter of fact, around the globe, there is no more in any country more than 33% of employees being engaged at work. And we'll define this in a minute. So the issue around engagement here, or the low level of engagement, unfortunately, most organizations, we will push it into the human resources department. And they will think that the solution by more resources, more training, and we will develop a workforce that's fully engaged. That didn't work. And the proof is year after year after year, we continue to get the same engagement level, but we continue to spend more time. I believe, as an ex-CEO myself, this is a C-suite issue. It's not a HR issue. And unless the C-suite jump into it and address it, we will get no improvement in this data. Just for Singapore, it costs the economy every year $6.7 billion every year. In the US, just for you to have a comparison, it's around $320 billion a year. No one dared to measure this data for China because we don't have the means to measure it because of the population. So it's a very serious issue and requires some work. The way we approached this research, and I did this research under the supervision of Professor Luc van der Laan, who guided me in the process through my academic career so far, which is something I'm grateful for. He's a very good friend as well. We took the picture of how we can if the current situation now is about declining work engagement rating in Singapore in general and in neighboring countries, how can we improve this? How actually the leadership cognitive abilities can contribute toward this level of engagement? And if we improve the capability, will we get something different? That was really the issue that we needed to address. So the guiding research question here is the following. What are the possible futures of work engagement in Singapore, given the strategic leadership capabilities of foresight and strategic thinking of leaders and the drivers of change by 2030? Early on, I was asked the question, 2030 is too soon. In corporate life, you cannot actually think beyond that. If the strategic planning is 3 to 5 years, 2030 for any organization is good enough for future scenarios. So that's something maybe you want to consider as we see the work. Now, strategic leadership theory itself lends itself to this research because of its predictive nature. Of course, the theory states that the characteristics, especially the cognitive base of leaders, can work as proxy in terms of what sort of decisions they will make in the future. So it's predictive, and we can apply it here if we are to work on scenario planning toward the future. Foresight and strategic thinking being the two cognitive abilities we selected from the cognitive base according to the theory can be measured and through empirical methods. So we use this as well in order to bring our study forward. And they can speculate the leaders' perceptions of any phenomena, whether it is an investment, whether it is risk management, whether it is procurement for the future, or a new strategy, or change, or any decision, competitive decision they need to make in the market. All of these are decisions that leaders will make, and it's a result of the cognitive capacity of the leaders. So this has been the foundation from a theoretical point of view, being the strategic leadership. On the other hand, we have the engagement theory. The engagement theory itself is also predictive, because if we can ensure that the engagement qualities of vigor, dedication, and absorption are in place, we can get better outcome, and we can get better individual outcomes and organization outcomes. So both theories together, if we look at them, have characteristics that we can now look at it from an angle of, are these predictive or not? Will this help us actually to predict future scenarios or not? And the bottom line of the comparison here, that the strategic leadership cognitive base predicts strategic choices. The engagement variables can mediate the relationship between the engagement antecedents and the individual organization outcome. So in summary, the two theories lead into organizational outcome. If we can understand the association between them, we may have a formula for success that can replace the current practice of just dumping the issue on the human resources department, and instead of this, focus on the leaders in terms of developing their capabilities, develop their foresight and strategic thinking in order to get better results toward the future. So this is the foundation of the study that was completed. Now, what you see in front of you here is the integrative conceptual model. So the top tier is around the theoretical model. And in theoretical model, we have portrayed here both the strategic leadership theory, the Hambrick model, of course, and the engagement work theory as two theories that we start to work with towards organization outcomes. And then if you look at the tier in the middle, this is the conceptual part of it, when we looked at the foresight and strategic thinking in relation to the work engagement and the individual outcomes of the organization. Then we operationalized this through a process that started with an environmental scan on the left-hand side, all the environmental drivers for change, moving into the leader's profile, which is psychometric. These are the measures that we used for, and we come to, back to this in a minute. And then we looked at all the variables, the cognitive variables and the drivers of change that can impact the actual engagement level. Based on that, we started to design the scenario matrix that we are going to use in order to produce the possible futures. So this is in one drawing, in one visual. You see now the theoretical foundation, you see the conceptual foundation, as well as the operationalization of the two concepts. Of course, without a good methodology, things do not work. So yes, there are many methods that we applied, the Delphi, the scenario, the environmental scan, but all these methods doesn't carry much weight unless there is a solid methodology that can actually prove that this is, at the end of the day, a valid approach to the problem. So let me explain to you what methodology we followed here. The methodology starts from, we followed the generic foresight process, the Varus model, which has, of course, in the blue color on the top here, inputs, analysis and interpretation, then the prospection section and the output section. There were two sets of data that we entered into the study: quantitative data and qualitative data. The quantitative data came from the measures that I will show you in the next slide. These were actually the TSI, or the time style, the foresight style that was developed initially by Jay and further developed by Luke, and then the strategic thinking using the decision-making model in order to decide what's the strategic inclination of the leaders. And these were the quantitative data that we brought to the data analysis. Then we have a complete set of qualitative data coming from epistele analysis. And both the quantitative data and the qualitative data, we fit into a Delphi panel, consists of 18 specialists. We had 10 academics and 8 CEOs from Singapore, who was based in Singapore with the right qualification. They were our Delphi panel that works through all the data sets that we have developed with questions in order to validate our findings. Based on that, we went into the prospection, and this is when we used the scenario development 2x2 matrix in order to develop the scenarios. So you can see here the methodology we have used. And as we discussed yesterday, I think in one of the sessions, and Alex made a very good comment about the methods. Yes, Alex, I agree with you. Methods are nothing. Methodology is everything. So we have a methodology now in place. Okay, now, on the analytical data, or the quantitative data we use, as I mentioned, we use the 3 sets of data coming from the 3 instruments: the time style, the foresight styles, and then the strategic thinking using the decision-making styles. And that gave us a profile of leaders in Singapore. In summary, this profile can be described as present, which means they live in the present time. They think in the present time. So there's not enough focus on the future. Second, adapting. They're just adapting to changes instead of framing or conceptualizing the future. And the third one is being analytical. So this is, again, the traditional strategic planning based on data and information, analytical analysis instead of conceptual analysis. And that gives us a good profile of what the leaders of Singapore, based on a sample of 330 strategy level leaders that we collected, give us a good insight of what's happening in the country. Those are all corporate executives at C-level. So that was a good reflection. And of course, we used the same data actually through the Delphi panel, who confirmed that, yes, this is their understanding of the leadership level in Singapore. And that was the first part that we completed here and the quantitative data. Then we moved into our first contribution here after we did the data was actually to do a epistele study. And in the epistele study, we used the traditional epistele, but we added to it an ethical dimension, because we can see clearly now in the decisions being made that will affect future generations, that unless we understand the drivers for change that can affect the ethical study, we will have gaps in our study. So that was a complete epistele analysis that we used to cover all the different dimensions of epistele plus ethics in order to understand the drivers of change that will affect engagement toward the future. And of course, we had to feed this back to the Delphi panel in order to confirm our finding. The study itself was a desktop study that took a considerable amount of time, but we came to with an outcome that you can see here. I'm not expecting you to read it. This is all the parameters that we analyzed. And we look at the metrics in terms of the certainty and impact. And then we selected the corner on the top right hand side when we have the maximum impact, maximum certainty, in order to produce a set of what we call predetermined trends and mega trends. Now, the predetermined trends and mega trends, we put this back again to the Delphi panel in order to confirm, and that gives us really a good understanding of some of the key measures that can either be favorable or less favorable in terms of the scenarios that can generate for the future. So we use the data at this point in time here in order to have the first maybe classification of the scenarios we are going to get. After that, we looked at all the wildcards. So we developed 12 wildcards that we expected to take place that obviously, if they happen, it will have impact. And we started to see harmonize this in terms of what's the possibilities of this to happen at the same time in order to produce our scenarios again. So from the quantitative data, from the predetermined data, and then finally the wildcard analysis, now we managed to put together the dimensions of our scenarios. We followed the scenario process here when we looked at the positive correlation between the uncertainties and the wildcards in terms of the globalization and immigration policies that actually formed one clear scenario in Singapore. And scenario 2, we addressed here the positive correlation between the uncertainties of major security breaches, trade protection, and national income at risk in Singapore, which again seems to resonate positively together. In the third scenario, we looked here at the correlation between the uncertainties of loss of trust in national politics, ethnic tension, the social conflict, and the leadership change, and the mentality change to counter climate change. Those were actually a set of parameters that also seems to synchronize together. And then the fourth scenario addressed the positive correlation between the uncertainties of promoting social sustainability in industrial relation law. Those were the uncertainties or the wildcards that we also expected to differentiate the different scenarios. Once we put this together, we were in a position to start to write the scenarios in depth. And in the scenarios, we described what the predetermined drivers of change will mean for the future. We also described what the wildcards or the uncertainties that we have here will mean for the future in each scenario. So we managed to compose the scenarios using the different dimensions here. So on the left-hand side and the vertical dimension, those were actually a measure of the drivers of change, the predetermined drivers of change, from favorable on the top to less favorable on the bottom. On the horizontal on the top, that was more reflection of how balanced are the cognitive capacity of leaders from the right to the left in terms of foresight and strategic thinking. And then on the bottom measure here, we addressed the engagement level, whether it's high or low. And using these dimensions, we could differentiate now based on the drivers of change, the predetermined and the wildcards. Based on the cognitive capacity of leaders, we now build a relationship between the foresight of strategic thinking and the engagement. And all this input was processed through our Delphi panel over 3 cycles to ensure that we can validate the data we are collecting. And as a result of this, we managed to get to the scenarios, which we also send back to the Delphi panel to confirm. And that was the final outcome in terms of scenarios toward the future for the engagement in Singapore in relation to the foresight and strategic thinking. The outcome of this study, or the third contribution here, can be summarized. Yes, there is a very clear association between the foresight and strategic thinking, cognitive capabilities of leaders, and the engagement of the employees in terms of their presence, in terms of dedication, the vigor, and the absorption measures that we had in place. And actually, the work engagement here act as mediating variable between the cognitive capacity of the leader and the individual outcomes, and collectively towards the organization outcomes as well. So that was also another measure. We also determined the moderating factor of the environmental drivers on a variety of areas here. The first one, of course, was the strategic leadership and influence or the moderating factor of the drivers of change around foresight, strategic thinking. The second one was the work engagement, how environmental drivers does affect the work engagement. And then, of course, the organization outcome, again, being affected by the environmental drivers. So these were the key findings of the study in terms of the effect of or the association and the relationship between the foresight, the strategic thinking, and the work engagement. So, in summary, there is a relationship between the strategic leadership and work engagement from a strategic leadership perspective. The use of leadership capabilities as proxies for predicting work engagement is also something we can rely on now. So we should maybe from a practical application like what Jay said this morning, so what? The outcome here is simple. Now we can change our tactic in organization. Instead of focusing on getting more training and more resources to HR for engagement program, we should focus now on developing the foresight and strategic thinking of leaders in order to develop them, in order to be able to trigger a higher level of engagement. And the use of strategic leadership theory here to complement futures research in developing scenarios of possible futures, that also is new to us in the field of engagement. So that was maybe the first time to run scenarios on engagement in Singapore based on the strategic leadership theory. We have here also added the research specific to the futures of work engagement in Singapore and to uncover a new perspective of recruitment and development of a strategic leader. I think the last bullet here may be the most critical element as a practical result of this research. I've spent most of my career before I started my research on developing leaders using leadership theories. And I should admit that didn't help much in terms of engagement. But the minute I started to get better exposure to the strategic leadership and the cognitive side of it, I started to see now a new way how we recruit leaders, how we develop leaders, how we build the capability of engagement in organizations through leaders, not through just human resources training courses, which I think will be a major benefit for organization, considering the loss in productivity we have now. And as a matter of fact, the loss of productivity is only one element. We haven't estimated, and we cannot estimate it, the loss of innovation and creativity that's lacking because of lacking of the engagement, the low level of engagement that we have in place. So this was the study that we completed, and I will be open now for questions, Luke.
Wade, any questions for Wade? Yes, there we go.
Hi, I have a question and a remark. First, a remark. I think you must not be a leader to be engaged. And the second is, your topic is called employee engagement in Singapore by the year 2030, with some
yes.
preceding words. Have you actually tried to interview the employees themselves and what they told you? Because you speculated quite a lot about C-level, top management, and also all the case. We are now experiencing a shift in a paradigm. It is not a GDP-driven paradigm anymore. It is something else. In a Western society, we experience a rise of purpose economy, for example, but you won't get to that by mere interviewing a C-level managers. You can only get to that by interviewing the employees.
Yeah. Just to answer your question, my company and my consultancy is based in Singapore. And this is what we do as organization. We have been working with human resources and employees through surveys for the last 20 years. So we have a very good sense of where the market is. The phenomena that you just described now in Europe and US, maybe because it's not there yet in Australia, I can assure you Singapore is a bit behind. No, this is not the case in Singapore. No. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Very, very interesting stuff. And I've been also involved myself, something similar over the years. I didn't catch you. Maybe that was I didn't come in the beginning in the first minutes, but I was interested in what is the empirical material? I mean, how did you collect the real material in places, in workplaces, and what's the kind of the depth and the breadth of your empirical material?
The material itself is 330 profiles, actually, were completed by senior executives, strategy level executives in Singapore. So they are all managers in Singapore who completed the three scales, the TSI or the time scale, the foresight, and the decision making. This is the main source. That's the quantitative data. The qualitative data, of course, came from the Pastille and the desktop analysis. Okay, thank you. There's a question here. Yeah.
Just two questions for clarity. It seemed as though you used the term uncertainty and wildcard as synonyms. Just your comment on that. And then where you presented your scenarios, you had the 3 bars of the 3 big driving factors. Were they connected like that? In other words, was there did they move in the same way? So that because it was the 3, so if you have the scenario there, it means that all 3 of those factors were towards the right. Were they interrelated like that, so strongly correlated?
Sure. It was clear from both the empirical study and
A microphone?
Sorry. Yeah, please.
No.
I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, they were clear from the Delphi study based on the feedback that the positive balanced cognitive abilities and the high leadership and the high level of engagement are actually in the same direction, and they produce similar results. Yes. Yeah. That's why I positioned him. Initially, actually, I only had 2, but then based on the Delphi, we added the 3rd element. Yeah.
And the uncertainty and wildcard you used.
Sorry, no, I didn't answer this one. Thanks, Luke. The certainty and uncertainty appeared in the predetermined. The wildcards were another set of data. If I mixed and used uncertainty while using the wildcard, maybe that's just a mistake. But the certainty and uncertainty appeared in the predetermined in terms of how certain or uncertain we are about some of the predetermined drivers of change that we picked, either through trends or mega trends. Yeah.
Any other? Yep.
Yes. Question about engaged worker. In our leadership curriculum, we use the term committed worker. And I wonder if it's just a matter of one word over another, because this morning we were talking about flexibility with futures literacy and future studies and so forth.
Okay. Well, I think what we learned, you said committed work. I think on this side, we didn't really focus on the supervisory leadership theories and some of the definitions that comes with commitment and others. We primarily focus on the foresight and the strategic thinking and in relation to engagement. What thinking about the future will mean for the future? What about if the leader is only thinking the past and what they learned from the past and they are not paying enough attention to the future? This really has been the range of, when we focus. We didn't focus on the commitment, on other concept that comes from the supervisory leadership pool. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Really like the connecting engagement and leadership with strategic and foresight thinking. I'm curious though, I've had some experience working with developing capabilities in director to senior vice president type levels. And they run into that problem sometimes though, where they say, we've done this great, we have this great capability now, we're learning this, but then we feel like we need to triage day to day all the time, and you end up getting a bit of a disengagement type level where they almost get a little bit maybe jaded. I'm wondering in the research if you come across that, and do you have any?
No, I live in it. I don't come
Tip
across it.
for
I
that.
live in it. I have beside my executive, I have actually masters in coaching psychology, and this is when I find coaching very valuable. So usually what I do, I will move into the space of education first about the concepts, get the whole concepts into their mind clear, and then I'll do a lot of coaching to create the space that you are talking about. Without this space, you cannot move into the actual work. All right.